to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to Talent Optimization. Today, we are talking about talent pathways inside of organizations and how do we kind of lead our staff from position to position to really grow them into staying with the organization over time. And so with me today, I have Rebecca Gibson, and Becca is the lead recruiter with Option Care Health. Becca has been a recruiter since 1996, and we had the pleasure of working together in a skilled nursing organization previously. So Becca, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. So the whole fun of recruiting and recruiting during COVID, and as we're kind of coming out of this pandemic, how has recruiting changed?
Honestly, I feel like recruiting has changed so much over the years. When I first started in recruiting, obviously straight out of college, we couldn't handle how many people were available for jobs. It was more the supply we had, the demand wasn't as much there. So it was 15 people fighting for one job. Whereas that has obviously changed greatly, especially within the healthcare platform. But I think all industries nationwide is really seeing this big change where there is continuously the low supply and high demand for people. I think with COVID, that did change dramatically, even more to the effect that we saw even more of a limited amount of supply of candidates in all realms. People were scared. People didn't want to go into jobs. They didn't know what precautions employers would be taking. So I think that realm has changed dramatically in supply and demand, but also in regards to how that we recruit. Before, we would recruit, just basically get a resume, call that person, see if they're the right fit based upon skills. In regards to now, I feel there's so many different aspects that we take into consideration within the recruitment process. One, obviously, being that we are constantly wanting to have a positive social media and social online reputation. That is something that many candidates look at now. That was never really viewed as much, in the past, as obviously social media has taken a huge increase now in regards to a focus. I think also, assessments, something that Tracy and I have talked about at great length about assessments based upon the job and how these assessments are really looked at and how they're evaluated for each of the positions that we have. So that's another great step that I think adds a lot in regards to the recruitment process to make sure that we're securing the right candidate. Overall, recruiting, I think, has gotten only better. It may be more difficult. It may be that we have to be a lot more creative when we're thinking about our recruitment efforts and a lot more active. Prior to this, I felt like a lot of recruiters could be a little bit more passive, where they would just do the post and pray, as I would say. You post the position and pray the right candidate, falls into that role or applies and sees the position. Now, obviously, it is more of that hunting them down, outsourcing for these candidates on a daily basis and finding more of those passive seekers that maybe weren't essentially looking for a job, but the best time to look for a job is when you're not looking for a job. You may find that perfect position. So I think that is a way that even recruiters have evolved over time. They really have to be more active, and I think that's really beneficial to any organization.
I love what you just said, and I'm going to break it down into 3 key points. Don't do post and pray.
Yes.
Don't do post and pray. We need to be creative with what we're doing and how we're recruiting. We need to make sure that our social media presence is really aligning with who we want to attract, because it's a key marketing tool. And I'm going to add a 4th one, and that is the impact of assessments to ensure that we have the right person in the right role to be successful.
Right. Exactly. You summed it up perfectly.
I know. And sometimes it's just going, okay, what were those 4 steps again? And what do we need to do? So when we say no longer posting and praying, right? And this, I think, really leads into point 2 that you talked about, which is we need to really be seeking, those passive candidates. And I think that really leads into how do we build those talent pathways into and through our organization? And so much of that is what happens at the outset of when we're starting to kind of plant the seeds of who we are. So for example, like who you are as Option Care Health, there's a lot of things you're doing to do that, to build that pathway into the organization. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah. So, from a recruitment perspective, we look at this as obviously sourcing and building our network. And to build that network starts honestly from being pretty proactive on LinkedIn or any of the job search engines. And honestly, building that network and creating that great culture, you want to attract people to, your website and really understanding what your company's about. So first thing that I do, in all honesty, every single day is I look to at least connect with 10 individuals within the industry, whether it be somebody that I think could potentially be in the future a candidate or an employee with Option Care, or whether that be a nurse, or maybe even it's just a colleague. Because what I always want to do is really understand, number one, about the industry. And number two, I really want to look at how I can continue to grow and open up those conversations with people that maybe aren't a fit now, or I don't have a position for now, or somebody that's not ready to move right now, but have that conversation and make that connection and open them up to the idea and help them understand more about the organization and the culture that we offer. Because it's always that beginning conversation that's never going to lead to a job offer. I shouldn't say never. It rarely leads to a job offer. It is more about making that relationship and making that connection.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much for that. And one of the things that, I'm finding with our clients that we're doing so often is, a lot of times we're still asking candidates the question of where do you see yourself in 5 years, right? And one of the key questions that I'm really asking my clients is where do you see the candidate that you bring into this role in 5 years inside your organization? So we're really forcing our clients, and for all of you listening that are in an internal executive or HR recruitment role, really think about that, because what it does is it's forcing you to create that talent pathway in your organization. Sometimes it's, hey, they're going to be in the same role, and that's totally okay for probably 80% of them. But for that other 20%, where are they going to be in 5 years? And how do you retain them so you can increase your retention? So what are your thoughts on that concept and those two kind of parallel questions, Becca?
I think that's a great point that you bring up, Tracy. And I think, unfortunately, it's not something that a lot of recruiters think about right away, myself included. It's something where I think because like I had stated before, the supply and demand is so off. So many of us get to the point of let's fill this position, not let's look at how we're going to retain this candidate for a long period of time and keep them challenged, right? And where do we foresee them growing to? And if not growing, staying in that same position. And I think that mentality is something that everyone does need to change, because as that supply and demand gets larger and larger of a gap, that's one thing you want to do is absolutely retain and limit that turnover. And in order to do that, you do have to take a picture and look at, okay, how is this employee going to be with our organization, or where are they going to be with our organization in 5 to 10 years? I think that's a very valid point that a lot of people don't even consider.
Thank you so much for that. What I love about this podcast and our conversations is the ahas that happen. Yeah. Like when I'm sitting listening to somebody I'm interviewing going, wow, what? I never thought about that. And I think that the other side of this too, and you brought up a really good point that I hadn't thought of, and that's, hey, what is the integration that's really happening between our recruitment team and our line level managers? Are we really having those conversations together about what are your needs in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years and the next month? Especially right now. We are in May of 2021 and the labor market is very tight.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, though, it's how do we start to work more closely together as these teams of, hey, my job isn't just hire in place, but also what's that retention piece? And how do we wrap things back around for that? I'm curious, have you had any of those conversations?
Yeah, I think you're hitting another great point in regards to having that relationship with the, department manager or hiring manager. That intake call that you usually have with them is very surfacey, right? What are your X, Y, and Z that you need in this position? Or what's the top 3 things that you look for? What's those soft skills that you need? And those are the customary standard, questions. But it is going that extra step to say, okay, well, what else do we see potentially this person going into? What else do you foresee as a need if we can continue to grow as we are thus far, right? Do we see another level being added in, someone within leadership that would report to you, right? How do we see that happening? And I think in the hustle and bustle life of all of our hiring managers, and as recruiters and talent acquisition teams know, hiring managers, think of it, I don't have time for this call. The time you put in is what you're going to get out of it. The recruiters can only understand so much about your specific area. So it is, I think, falling on the responsibility of both the hiring manager as well as the recruiter to really dig deeper and take that time in that initial intake call, because that's only going to build on the relationship that you have if you're finding somebody that you can foresee in 2 to 3 years with us growing, this is where they should be.
Awesome. Those are such great points. And we mentioned assessments earlier. And one of the things that many of our clients are doing right now is doing a job assessment. So, hey, here's the position. What does that hiring manager think that they need? What does the skip level manager think that they need? What does the recruiter think that this position needs? So that we can come to an agreement on, yep, this is exactly what this position needs. And knowing that there's some leadership growth, we may need somebody that has some independent leadership drives as a part of their natural behavioral strengths, because we know that that position is going to go there, whereas these other 7 are not. So we just know in the next 8 nurses that we hire, we need 1 that's going to have XYZ traits to it.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think assessments have taken on a very negative connotation in the entire process. I think hiring managers view it as, well, do you not believe in what I know would be a good fit for this position? Do you not believe in my opinion anymore? And I think it is more educating them on how these assessments can really help us and elevate the organization to a different level by looking at and really being able to pinpoint these certain behavioral characteristics, because that's not anything that, unfortunately, like the normal eye or even questions can really dive into in a normal interview. And I don't even know if a hiring manager would be comfortable, doing a deep dive into these types of questions that are evaluated through these assessments.
I so agree with that. So if you're curious, if you go back to podcast number 1, we kind of lay this out. And podcast number 2 is an interview in Matt Pupsell from Predictive Index, where we actually go through and talk about what is talent optimization from a leadership framework? And, what does that actually look like from the day-to-day HR, but also as our organizations are looking at our business strategies as compared to our business results. If we're not meeting our results, why? And guess what? It always comes back to people. And that's what we're all so focused on, is ensuring we have the right people in the right seat to be fulfilled in the role that they're doing, because that increases our engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And employees need to remain engaged, as do hiring managers, as well as everyone at every level. I mean, the employee engagement is a big focus, I think, for a lot of organizations. And you're only going to be able to get that through understanding the different behaviors and how each person reacts to certain things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And COVID has thrown like a monkey wrench in all of this, right? Now everything's on Zoom, unless it can't be. And in your world, guess what? There are some of our heroes, which have been all through COVID really serving in person in all of these different types of situations. So, there's definitely a spin on that has an impact both on recruitment and where are we going with not just the communication, but where are we going specifically and how we're serving differently.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, with COVID, the virtual platform has become, something standard in society now. And unfortunately, from a talent acquisition perspective, that's been very difficult because if you can't have somebody in front of you for our hiring managers, sometimes we're finding that it's not really the best fit when somebody is just being able to be interviewed, virtually or assessed virtually, right? And everything that they've experienced with the company has been over this virtual platform. But when they go their first day, they don't get that culture, right? They don't get that feeling that they did virtually. So yeah, I agree. COVID has definitely thrown a big wrench in all aspects, especially with recruiting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious. So in every kind of show that we do, we wrap up with what's one key takeaway that you have for executives that have listened into our conversation today?
I think the point that you had made in regards to what we need to really look at and think about with candidates that we're bringing on board. And this is every level of candidate. And I think, people think entry level positions, we don't need to think about where they're going to be in 2 to 3 years. They'll probably still be in this entry level position. I think that's a huge takeaway for any executive. You have no idea the potential that somebody has, the drive, the motivation, what their future plans are, unless you really ask those questions and think about it yourself on where you want this person to grow. I think ideally we all want somebody to stay with us for, 10 to 20 years that we don't see now. We see turnover happening at 1 year, 2 year, and then they're not challenged anymore. And then they're looking for that new challenge or those new responsibilities. So I think that point in regards to looking internally at, our organizations, what we can do with that person or that employee or even that position and where we foresee that in a couple of years.
Absolutely. And I love the point you just made, which is, hey, what are the growth options for this? And really, so often we tend to call those, what are our talent pathways? So do we have a leadership talent pathway that can come from any specific area? And then do we have, I like to call it a specialist talent pathway, where it's somebody that is a subject matter expert, but doesn't want to lead people. It doesn't mean that they should be capped just because they don't want to lead people, because there's a place for them in the organization. And it may be hopping between different departments so that they're not bored, they're getting different experiences while still being able to be a key contributor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And what does that look like? I mean, not all lead positions are people leader positions. And it's exactly what you said. They could be the subject matter expert. They could be the mentor. They could be the trainer. There's many other ways of challenging somebody and pushing them and adding on responsibility without them actually leading people. I think that's the normal customary thought in everyone's mind, is that if you're going to get promoted, you're going to manage people. And in the world today, that's not always the case. And it is kind of looking at the organization of how can we do that? Can we add on a position that isn't necessarily a people leader?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the other side of that is, and I know, Becca, you made me this beautiful map at one point in time of what a talent pathway looks through an organization. Because one of the key things, especially with the new generation that's entering the workforce, is, well, what are my options here? And guess what? Sometimes when we don't communicate, we make up what's happening in our head, and it's not always what the facts are. So when we can provide a roadmap for new staff or current staff into, hey, here's some options for growth, and here's who you need to talk to about it, it kind of takes, that elephant out of the room that says there's no growth opportunity for me here when there potentially is.
Absolutely. And I think also kind of building on that is the old school thought process is there was just this box A, box B, box C, just this ladder that you would climb straight up, where it is not like that in many organizations. There's so many different branches now and different directions to go. It's not like this typical ladder. It is more like a tree of what way do you want to go? What division or what area do you want to go into? And I think that's hard for some organizations to really look at and say, okay, well, gosh, this person could go in so many directions. And you're exactly right. You have to communicate that and be very upfront with that, even in the interview process, or even in when you're sourcing a candidate and just passively discussing things with them, is provide them with that information of all the different opportunities or areas that somebody can grow into. Because it's not just, okay, you're this, and then you're going to become a supervisor, and then you're going to become a manager, because there's so many different opportunities outside of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, what is your one key takeaway for our HR professionals listening in? And I'm going to name most of these HR folks listening in have organizations of about 200 employees or less, and they're really generalists. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've worked in an organization and worked with HR generalists that they're like, talent acquisition and recruiting, that's honestly the furthest from their thought process, because they're dealing with so many other things and have so much on their plate. The one takeaway that I guess I could say in regards to this, when you're focusing on recruitment, it is the networking piece. It is building that culture. It is taking the time. It takes 5 minutes in the beginning of your day. Go onto LinkedIn and connect with some, different people within the industry, different people that are colleagues. You're going to learn a lot, as well as you're going to, have some great conversations with people when they do respond. So I think you need to really make it a priority to build that network now, because it's only going to help you in the future when you are looking for candidates and you think back to even, I had this great conversation with this person. Maybe they're not the right fit, but maybe they can help lead you in the direction of finding somebody, or what that you can do to really help market your organization. Absolutely. So Becca, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Absolutely. It was so great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in, connecting with Becca, so we're going to take our one key takeaway for our HR professionals and executives. Find Becca on LinkedIn. It is Rebecca Gibson. There is a link to her LinkedIn profile in the show notes, along with a link to Option Care Health. In addition, if you love what you heard today and you're looking for more of that step-by-step, how do you build out a talent pathway inside of your organization? Join our Talent Optimization Foundation program. We meet every Monday at 1 p.m. Central and specifically have either office hours conversations or a webinar where we're walking through these very key issues and how you can implement that inside of your organization. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.